Okay, hi there, Facebook. Esme Murphy, along with, of course, Congresswoman Angie Craig, freshman Democrat from the 2nd Congressional District. Thanks for coming on the show, and then thanks also for doing this as well. One of the things I like about Facebook is, in doing these Facebook Lives, it's a little more informal. I get to ask the questions that, I think a lot of people would like to ask. And one is, what has anything surprised you? Or what has surprised you about being in Washington? Because obviously, you've done a lot of homework and you've gotten ready and you got bills, but has anything surprised you?
The biggest surprise is how hard it is to actually meet people who are on the other side of the aisle and spend quality time with them. You spend so much time with your own caucus and in your own caucus meetings, and on the House floor, you'll even notice we separate by party on the House floor. So I have specifically tried to do things that put me in the vicinity of Republicans because I think we've got to find some common ground in this country again. And, I'll give you one example. Pete Stauber and I were on a train together right after we were sworn in.
And he's obviously the Republican congressman from the 1st Congressional District, another freshman.
Pete is in the 8th,
Oh, he's in the 8th, of course, in the 8th, Jim Hagedorn's in the 1st, the 8th, right, Duluth, Iron Range, yes, northeastern Minnesota.
So, I was going to get a beverage, I'll put it that way, and I got my beer, and I stopped, and I saw Pete sitting and reading a newspaper, and so I just sat down with him, and I just started talking, and it's really surprising that it takes that much effort to actually sit down and talk to folks on the other side of the aisle.
Right, but you also mentioned, before the show, you said actually out of that conversation came something that you have in common that I think a lot of people in Minnesota have in common, and that is a child who has special needs. And you're talking about maybe putting together some legislation to provide additional funding or resources for children and families who have special needs.
Yeah, this is this is an important issue, not just for families with special needs, but Pete and I, out of that conversation, just spending 45 minutes together on a train, we ended up deciding we should work together on special education funding. Many of our school districts find a lack of resources specifically because the federal government is not living up to its commitment to fund special education at 40%. So Pete and I are going to get on a bill together which would over time raise the level of investment appropriations by the federal government back to our local school districts and our states in order to more fully fund special education. And that's where it starts, right? Where we sit down and probably 60-70% of what Pete thinks maybe I don't agree with, but boy, if we could just focus on the 20-30-40% we can agree on, that's a start in this country again.
Right. And you said both of you have children that do have a special need, and so that was a bonding point. And I think I have a child that has dyslexia. I think our second guest mentioned that he has a child that has special needs. I think it's so common, and I think people really struggle on how best to deal with this, and it's not easy. It's very difficult.
That's right. And so you start with, we have a personal connection. We both have children with special needs, and then you start with, well, how do we, and we both have community issues of underfunded schools, and part of that is the lack of federal funding for special education, and the way it plays out in local communities, and why everyone should care, not just parents with children with special needs, is because we keep having to come back to our local communities for more taxes, for bonding referendums, because the federal government isn't living up to its commitment. Hey, my district, we send our money to Washington. We should get an appropriate amount of dollars back from Washington.
Right. Let me ask you about this. I'm on all the fundraising lists, both Republicans and, if you sign up to follow somebody, you get all this. And you are actually already, you just won. Congratulations. You beat the incumbent, Jason Lewis, who's a Republican, but you are being targeted by the Democratic National Congressional Committee already for 2020. Is that difficult? You just won and you can barely breathe, and already they're talking about, beating you in 2020.
Well,
and raising money to beat you in 2020.
That's right. Well, the NRCC, as you mentioned, has already put me on the list of incumbent freshmen that they would like to beat in 2020. And, a little bit amusing that Tom Emmer is leading the NRCC. Tom and I sat together on the plane back from Washington a few weeks ago, so that was good fun. And I am a frontline member, which is, from the DCCC's perspective, among the 40 members of Congress that will need the most protection to hold their seat in 2020. Don't forget, this is an R+3 district, and I won it by 6 points.
Which means if you poll everybody in the district, there are 3% more Republicans, and you did win
That's
it. I mean,
right.
so but it's clearly
That's right.
it's clearly a swing district.
It absolutely is a swing district, and that's how Democrats took back the House and are able to be in the majority now. Is 40 of the 63 freshmen that came into the Congress on the Democratic side took those seats from Republican members, putting the checks and balances back in our government system here today.
All right. And our second guest actually took issue with my saying that one of the reasons, or the main reason that House Democrats took back the House for Democrats was because of health care. Do you think that's the case?
Oh, I think that's absolutely the case.
Okay.
When I talk to my constituents, healthcare costs are the number one concern. And, for the last decade, the conversation has been about the cost of health insurance. And certainly that is a real issue for constituents, especially in the individual marketplace, which is why I offered my first piece of legislation to help reduce premiums in the individual marketplace. But we've got to take the conversation beyond insurance. We've got to take it to the cost of prescription drugs. We've got to take it to the cost of health care. So my first bill, H.R. 1425, is a piece of the puzzle, but I spent
And that would lower premiums.
It would lower premiums in the individual marketplace, but it's only a piece of the puzzle. It's a piece that I believe can get some bipartisan traction, which is where I'm aiming to affect. But look, healthcare is complicated. We know that now.
Right.
One of the first pieces of legislation I voted on when I was sworn in was to protect pre-existing conditions, and the U.S. House joined, advocating to protect pre-existing conditions. Remember the Texas case deemed that unconstitutional, pre-existing condition protections as part of the ACA.
Right. How do you pay for that, though? Everybody wants lower premiums.
Yeah. Well, see, that's the virtuous cycle of the reinsurance bill that I've introduced, because if you lower premiums, you then lower the amount of subsidies required, right? Under the ACA, you open up the marketplace for more people to afford it, so you essentially are able to spread the risk pool to healthier patients. So over time, and just to be clear, I'm asking for a CBO score for what this would cost, and it's already received
That's the Congressional Budget Office.
the Congressional Budget Office. It's already received a hearing out of the Energy and Commerce Committee that occurred last week, which is really legislation on fast track. And we expect to find a pay for depending on what the Congressional Budget Office estimates are.
And the Congressional Budget Office is nonpartisan, so
That's right.
that is something that's very important.
right.
Are there any kind of comments or questions at all?
I
Or
don't
no?
have any questions.
Okay, no questions yet. One question I did want to ask you is, and you're on the Ag Committee, the Small Business Community, and also Transportation.
That's right.
You're not on one of these committees where they are subpoenaing the president, but certainly there's a lot of talk in the democratically controlled House about the investigations of the president and also the possible impeachment of the president. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I've said for 2 years now that we need to look into and protect the Mueller investigation. To me, that's not a political statement. That's a statement of we need to know whether a foreign power interfered with a U.S. election. And, I will look at my constitutional duty, but at the same time, I want to wait for the Mueller report to really make any comment. And frankly, for me, I'm on the committees I'm on because those are the ones I wanted to be on. I didn't want to be part of an oversight or investigative committee. I want to work on reducing the cost of healthcare in this country, investing in transportation and infrastructure. I've already done a ride-along with Dakota County, Scott County. I'm in Goodhue County soon, our towns and our townships, and how best I can support the ag community in my district. It's about a 50% suburban district, but it's 50% rural. And I think we need an infrastructure package that is going to revitalize America and make sure that people have the opportunity to earn a good life where they live. And that's the work I want to do. I want to be a legislator.
Okay. And I've asked this of male legislators and male members of Congress as well. And I'm always sort of fascinated. I think a lot of people are like, how do you balance it? Because you still have a kid who's in high school, which is a big deal. I mean, yes, they can stay home alone, but, it's hard. It is hard. I still have a kid in high school. And you've got a job that's not like you're representing Virginia. You've got to fly home. How does that work? How do you balance that?
Well, so first of all,
And you've got
I should say,
she's got 4 boys.
I have 4 boys.
So it's like,
Yeah, I usually, during my campaign, and even now, I say, people ask me, what makes you think you're qualified to be in Congress? And I always say, I've survived middle school 4 times. You have no idea.
With 4 boys.
With 4 boys. But for example, I landed on Friday. I met my wife. We went straight to go get our son, who works as a courtesy clerk at Lunds & Byerly's in Eagan. We picked him up from work and we took him home and had dinner. So, it is a balance. Fortunately, I have a great partner. We figure it out. I have a great wife. We figure it out. What's interesting is, my youngest son is at that point where many parents understand this is where they pretty much ignore you anyway.
Yeah.
As long as there's food in the fridge
Yes.
and somebody at home to make sure that everything's okay, it's
Right.
good. But the other thing and many of my colleagues, my freshman colleagues, had young children.
Yeah.
And I often say to them, look, I traveled about half the time when I was an executive at St. Jude. So, you figure out what works for you and
Right.
your family. The great news is the 3 boys we have in college and in trade school, once they left the home, I think they actually miss me, and they text me all the time. I get more texts from my kids in college than I do my son in high school.
That's something.
Right?
That matters, yes.
Yeah, it does. It
Okay,
does.
well, that's very cool. Well, listen, Angie Craig, Congresswoman Craig, thank you so much for coming in. Thanks for doing this as well. We really appreciate your time.
Enjoyed it.
So thank you, and thank you, Facebook, for listening.